10 years. And then I was a reading specialist at Susan Lindgren working K-5, and now I was at Peter Hobart this fall, and then through a series of events ended up in kindergarten at Susan Lindgren. So I'm hoping to be back there in kindergarten next year as well. So I pulled up the questions you sent me just so I have some kind of guidance. But one thing talking about finding a school, I think I always grew up in the era of like, you just went to your neighborhood school and that was what you did. There weren't choices, you just kind of went where you lived. So people did a lot of picking where they lived for their school. But now there's a lot of options. And I think we're seeing a lot more options because of COVID, because enrollment's going down. So there are virtual options. There is Spanish immersion in St. Louis Park. In Richfield, they have dual immersion in STEM. So I think you ultimately know your child the best, and you can go visit schools. And I think I've never personally visited schools, but I've heard people who go and they visit. Oh, you're fine. I'm used to noise when I'm talking, so I appreciate that. So I think if you go and visit schools, you'll kind of get a feel of, does it feel right? Does it feel like a place I can see sending my child to every day? Because you will connect with people in the hallways and you'll go into classrooms. And so I think picking a school is very personal. I know for myself, I never judge anybody based on where they pick their school because it is so personal and it's so what's right for your child. Maybe, I think one thing to think about, Spanish immersion is amazing, but if you feel like your child might have some learning difficulties, that's probably not the best route to go. And so kind of looking at those things about how are they in picking up and remembering things? How are they reading when they're 4? They're not supposed to be reading when they're 4. But are they learning their letters? Are they doing that kind of thing? Because there do tend to be problems if a child starts at an immersion school and they're not learning English and then learning difficulties come up. So I think it's just all these little pieces that you know about your child to think about what is the best place for them to go. But early childhood screening, I remember we used to do a little spring gathering where parents would bring their child in and meet with a teacher. I haven't heard if that's happening yet, but if you do have an incoming kindergartner, I'd be kind of looking for that because it's just a day where they come and they sit with the teacher and do like, can you show me how you write your name? What color is this? And kind of a check-in so they can give you some more information. But I think the biggest question I hear, and it's something I had to decide as a parent myself too, was when to start kindergarten. My oldest was born in July, and so she's actually an older kindergartner. She turned 6 last July. She'll be 7, going into 1st grade this fall. And so for us, myself being a teacher, I always knew with a summer baby I was going to wait. Because in teaching 1st grade, I had students who had started early, and I had parents who never regretted waiting with their child, but I had parents who regretted starting their child younger. And so in my head, I always just thought, with McGuire, she's a summer birthday, we're just going to wait. And then I did start to question it, because you question everything as a parent. And I was like, okay, should we start her? And it was February of 2020, and I was like, maybe she'd be ready, maybe we should do it. And then COVID, and I was like, well, there's my answer. And I look at her now compared to a year ago, and I think the experience she's having at kindergarten is 100% better than it would have been a year ago, because she's that much more ready. She was an early reader, so it wasn't an academic thing, it was a social thing. It was a being at school all day thing. And so, again, you do know your child best, and you can ask everybody and everyone will have a different answer. And so I think you just have to think about, what does a kindergarten day look like? And it is long. Like, my kids come to school right now at 7:30, and they're in my room until 11 when we go to recess. And so there's a lot of transitions, it's a lot of stamina. And I fortunately got in January, so I had they were a little bit aged by then. But it is a lot to take in for a kid. And so I think you look at how long can they sustain an activity. We don't expect kindergartners to sit and do something for 15, 20 minutes in the beginning of the year. But can they sit and sustain play or listening to a story for 5 or 10 minutes? And I know myself as a parent, we are in this like detox of screen time currently, because March of 2020, my husband and I were both trying to work from home with a 3 and a 2-year-old. And so what did we lean on was screens. Like, I have to have a meeting, he has to have a meeting, well, you'll sit for a show. And so I think that's one of the biggest things that we're seeing now at school is that kids don't have the stamina of activities that don't involve a screen. And so my biggest suggestion as a parent is every night we make sure that we are laying in bed together for 15, 20 minutes and reading. Because even if Finley is, for 10 of those minutes, crawling around on the bed and playing pretend, she's at least like in the space and practicing that like involvement in listening. And I thought we're reading Matilda with my 6-year-old, and I thought she was not listening at all. And then today she said something about the book, and I was like, oh, she is listening. Like, there we go. So I think that kind of thing as a parent is going to be the biggest help, is helping them to maintain an activity. It doesn't have to be academics. I always tell parents, let me do the pushing at school, because my own child, when she comes to me and she's like, what does this say? And I'm like, well, say the sounds. Just tell me, Mom. I'm like, okay, but I know at school she wouldn't say that to her teacher. And so my biggest thing is making learning fun. We want the kids, when they come into kindergarten, to love reading. We want them to love listening to books. We want them to play. And I think that's one of the things I'm most grateful for here, is because I wanted Finley to learn about being at school, but be playing, because she's 4, and that's what they're supposed to do. And 5 and 6-year-olds are still supposed to play too. And so when they get home from school, I have a lot of parents, what should I do after school? I'm like, play and read books and go to the park, because we're doing a lot during the day. And so just giving them that time. And I think if you are on the fence about when to start, go visit a classroom. I know we are in St. Louis Park starting back up on classroom visits. And so they're doing tours at the elementary schools for kindergarten. Now I just suggest going and looking and seeing like, what does a day in kindergarten look like? Because that will give you the best picture of, is it something you see your child doing all day, or would another year playing? I mean, I would never not say another year of playing is great, because I honestly believe that that's what they need at that age. But yeah, I think you know your child best, but go check it out for yourself as well, because it's very different than when we were in kindergarten. Very different. And I even said we go to recess and lunch, and we come back for an hour of attempting academics. And every day I'm like, kindergarten should be half day still, because from noon to 1 we are not productive. And it's just because that's a long day. And so I just think the gift of time is a gift that you will never regret giving your child, because it's something you can't get back, but it's something that they can learn so much from. And watching my 6-year-old this year, I'm just amazed and thinking, I even talked to my neighbor about it. She's like, think about McGuire a year ago. Would she be doing this? No, it would have been a mess. And so I'm always thankful that we gave her that time. And I think that's a huge decision. And now on the flip side, Finley will be a young kindergartner, so we'll get to see both ends of it. But
what about the fear of kids, being bored or not being challenged and that?
Yeah, and I think I'm kind of the mean mom, because I tell McGuire, we'll try that at home. I'm bored. And I'm like, well, bored's a choice.
Okay.
I said, you have a house full of books, you have a house full of toys, I'm like, think of all the games we play in the car. And so I think,
and also it's okay to be bored.
It's okay to be bored, yes. And I think,
I'm bored too.
Yeah, exactly, like, thanks. And I think the reality of the classroom is you have kids who are, in my kindergarten class, I have kids that are reading whatever you put in front of them, and I have someone still working on the letters of their name. And so the reality is, who's getting most of my time? The child who still needs to learn the letters of their name. And so there's a lot of things that you can help as a parent and being like, if you're at school and you are working on this, and I do that a lot with the kids, is like, oh, you did that already, so let's try this next activity. And so I think just thinking of the reality of that, your child's teacher loves them and wants the best for them, and they have 21 kids at the same time. Of like, they can do things with them. And so I think but that does come to be a situation for some kids though as well.
It's something we hear quite a bit as a teacher. It's like, I don't want them at 3rd, 4th, 5th grade getting into trouble because they're not challenged.
Yes.
Or it's like,
yeah, and I think this might be an unpopular opinion among some people, but I think when kids are misbehaving because they're bored, I think that that's a different issue.
Okay.
Of like, you know, there's always, from the teachers I know, there's always different activities for kids to do. And so I think, I mean, it could very well happen, but I don't know.
On that same, the point of the age, can you speak to, I felt this at the time, it's hard to think in March for because they're changing and growing so much, what this child will be in September, and you think, well, I don't know, but then, you know, that's a half a year more to that. I mean, you know, I think that's a hard.
And I think you're supposed to register for kindergarten by a certain date because they need to know numbers, they need to make classes. But the reality is, if you get to August and you're like, you know what, I think they're ready, you could still register your child. And so, and you could even register them now and say, oh, let's see. And then in August say, you know what, they're not ready. Because I think, but I definitely would say you need to really think about it if you're waffling, because I have seen some kids who start and then it's not going well and they get pulled out, and I just think that's not a situation you want to be in. And so just really thinking about, and I think when kids have come to preschool, like all of us have a very fortunate position where we can send our kids to preschool. And so they have this background of they're sitting in a group, they're listening to stories, they're doing activities. So kindergarten won't be a huge shock to them, it'll just be a longer day. And so I think overall, if they're ready, they're gonna be okay. But it's like, you know, some kids don't have the privilege of going to preschool or early childhood, and so kindergarten is a lot tougher.
Can I ask, in your class, do you have anyone who's turning 7 this year?
Yes.
How many?
1. Or you mean like in the school year?
Yeah, like for instance, Evelyn's birthday is the end of May. And
Yes.
We really went back and forth about it. We are sending her to PSI.
Yeah.
But it was not a short decision. There was much discussion. And I'm just curious if you have any kids turning
I have
7 in
1
kindergarten.
who was 7 already, like 7 mid-year, and didn't repeat, just didn't go to school with COVID. And so I think now, especially with COVID, the age ranges are going to be a lot different than they were a couple years ago when everyone was like, well, September 1st, we're starting them, or summer birthdays. So I have seen a wider age range, and I think this kindergarten class in general is a little older, because a lot of parents, if they had the choice, waited. Instead of, like myself, I was like, I can't do distance kindergarten for my own child. That will not be healthy for any of us.
For sure.
So we waited.
I was just curious.
Yeah, and I would say most of the time when you see someone who waited, it's like a middle of June to August birthday, typically. But there's definitely ones like April, May, once in a while.
Yeah.
Does that help?
I mean,
You've already
made the
decided,
decision.
so.
She's going. I was just
Yeah.
curious what you were seeing, because I have, anecdotally, I know a lot of parents pulled kids from PSI in kindergarten in 2020 and then 2021. It just, for the reasons you're talking about. It's very, very hard to do kindergarten remotely and then to do immersion kindergarten remotely if you're not a Spanish speaker.
Yeah.
I never known a Spanish speaker.
It's hard.
It's really,
I mean, I did it for, my kid was in 1st grade, it was hard, but I just.
and I think
anecdotally
you'll
I've
see
heard
it
that.
more like in the next couple years, and then it'll maybe even back out. But I do think that was what I was gonna say.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, you'll hear, like, I had a student in 1st grade who you never would have known he was the youngest. And birth order. I think that makes a huge difference too.
For sure.
If McGuire were the 2nd one, it might have been a no-brainer to just send her, because they have the older siblings, they're doing more. She was the 1st, and it was like, yeah, we're gonna wait. So I think birth order, with Abby being the 2nd too, that can make a huge difference, because they're just overall more mature. I mean, Finley's not mature, but she does more. She's mature
she
at school.
is.
Yeah. I'm hoping she's a kid that like goes to school and is amazing, and then comes home and gives it all to me.
She is.
So yeah, and I think most kids. That's the thing, is like we hear as parents, like at the end of I braced my husband. I said, okay, September and October we're not going anywhere, any school days in the evening, because it will be a nightmare. And like, she was doing great, and I was like, what's going on? I was expecting total meltdowns every night because she's exhausted. and she held it together, but I know that like, it'll be a different game when Finley starts, and we'll just have to, you know, give yourself grace during that transition, because it's big, and there's a lot of expectations on kindergartners that we as teachers don't wanna put on them, but as a system, it gets put on them, and so that's why I'm always a big proponent of the gift of time if you can. And that, you know, but a lot of times the second and third are a lot more ready to come.
It's not no longer bugs, they've
Yeah,
gotten dragged everywhere.
exactly, and they talk about different things that, yeah, Finley said, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, whoops, parenting slip, but, yeah, so I think there's a lot of factors, but I think if you have questions or have wonderings, like, these 4 people are great to talk to about like what they notice, because you see them every day in a setting of sitting in a group and doing that, because myself, like, I couldn't tell you if your child's ready. I can tell you what we do during the day, but you know your kid the best.
I was gonna mention that my kids went to Susan Lindgren, and now they're you guys' age probably, and for my son, they did a lot of the looping or the same teacher for 3 years, and I always chose that because I just felt like it meant that they got to know the parents and the kids better. But he had a male teacher for 4, 5, 6, and he did not give any homework because he said, we work so hard during the day. When you go home, have a friend over, play basketball in your backyard, do this, do that. But the interesting part was, and that's kind of why we chose him, because I liked that, the parental pressure. Oh, I can't believe you'd send your kid to him. They don't do the homework. They don't do the, you know, how is he doing it? It was very interesting.
Yeah,
But that was kind of like my philosophy, and I think it's a great one.
And I think more and more schools are going towards no homework.
Okay.
Because
Does Susan Lindgren have homework?
I don't, but I think for the most part, no. I think we ask kids to read every night.
Yeah.
But overall, the philosophy behind that is that the students who are returning the homework aren't always the ones that need the most practice. And so then, you know, what's the point of giving it and then putting pressure on families that don't have the time of night, or a kid that doesn't have a parent at home that night that can help them.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be pressured or see other kids turning in homework when they don't have that support at home. And so we've used it as more of a equity piece, because it's, when I taught first grade, I sent homework as an option, like, here if you want to do it, but it doesn't have to come back to me. I'm not checking it off. Because in first grade they couldn't do it on their own, and so I'm not going to say you need to turn this in when they might not have someone at home who can help them. And even like McGuire's in my class currently, she came up to me the other day, she's like, Mom, you need to empty my folder. And I was like, yeah, you're right, because every day I'm like, I don't have time to empty your folder after school, whoops. But it's just like, I'm especially appreciating that now as a parent, to be like, the last thing I need to do when we get home from school is make you sit down and do some homework. I'd much rather go to the park, I'd much rather read some books, and I can't even empty the folder after 3 days, let alone like take some homework out and help her with it. So I think it's just, as a school system overall, I think not just St. Louis Park, but a lot of schools, they're trying to recognize the, not burden, but just the amount that's being put on families, and just being like, school is school, go home and unwind, because I do have a 6-year-old dealing with anxiety, and it's taking a lot out of us too. And so it's just like the mental health piece, I think that's one of the biggest things to come out of this, is that we as teachers were like, that's the biggest thing we need to do right now, is support families in whatever way that looks like. So yeah, there's no homework that I know of, but I could be wrong.
I thought it was district, that's why I asked.
It could be, yeah.
Does it Chloe do homework?
Hobart doesn't get it in kindergarten.
Hobart doesn't? Does it Chloe do homework?
No.
Yes, I doesn't either.
They have,
Yeah.
my daughter's in 4th grade, and they have morning work, and if she doesn't finish it, she always says that if kids don't finish it, they
They keep
keep
going, yeah,
on it.
okay.
But it's like, we always get emails like, but if you can't, don't stress out, so, you know.
Optional.
I'm thinking, okay. Oh, and then one other thing, like helping your kids prepare for kindergarten with just the day-to-day things, like zipping coats. Don't send them to school in shoes that tie if they don't know how to tie their shoes. Because just think of everything that you help them with times 21. And be like, okay, is this something they can do on their own? If not, could the teacher help 21 kids? And like, obviously, we're not going to send a kid outside unzipped if they don't know how to zip their coat, but it's just something that helps with the transition of like them getting themselves ready independently to go to recess and outside at the end of the day. But my own 6-year-old's not tying shoes, so she wants shoes that tie. I'm like, well, when you learn how, then we'll buy some. But right now, I'm not sending you to school because I'll be tying them all day at school. So
I had this perception that helped my kids be less anxious at school too, and their confidence, like thinking about confidence, if they went and they knew that their shoe came untied, they could tie.
yeah,
And then they could put on their own snow stuff, that was like one less thing to be anxious about.
for
doing.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, because you do have kids that like worry about my shoe. It's like, oh, no, we can fix that.
Yeah, I got shoes I can't
Mhm.
tie.
And I think another thing is always reminding them that the adults are there to help them. Because I think sometimes they think, well, I can't ask the teacher that, or I can't. But it's like, no, that's our job. Like, I'm there to help you, and I'm there to help you learn these things. So it's okay to ask me, because you do have the kids that will like have an accident because they don't ask to go to the bathroom. And so like teaching them the confidence, but also the self-advocacy of like, my teacher might not notice this. Like at home, we can notice like, you have been dancing for 2 minutes, go to the bathroom. In a classroom, the teacher might not notice that. So teaching them some of that self-advocacy of like, if you need something and it's, you know, go ask your teacher, go ask an adult in the room. So, and in St. Louis Park, all of the kindergarten teachers have an additional adult in the room. So there's always that extra savior.
It goes to recess and goes to lunch.
Yeah, well, the teachers go to recess now. We go, and then, but the helper goes to lunch. But I also think, I don't know other districts, but St. Louis Park has started where the teacher goes to recess, and I think it's been a huge help. Because, like I have a student who's on the spectrum, and he would spend all of recess standing there. But when I'm out there, I can be like, hey, go try this. And so like having the teacher out there that knows them the best, it helps with a lot of staving off issues that tend to happen at recess. So.
What would you say, academically is helpful to start kindergarten knowing what?
I think numbers, counting to 10, recognizing numbers to 10. I wouldn't say they can't start kindergarten if they don't know that. Like we're learning that the first few months of kindergarten, but it does definitely help if they know the letter names, some of the sounds, starting to recognize that, but then even like playing games in the car counting. Like not necessarily seeing like, let's count to 10, let's count from 10 backwards. Let's look for, we play a game in the car where we go A to Z. We look like if we're driving somewhere farther, and we say, okay, whoever finds letter A, find it first, then go B, so that they're just recognizing it, but it's fun. Like it's not like, let's sit down and practice all your letters on, no, they don't need that. So just starting, and even rhyming, like in the car, be like, I'm gonna say bat, what rhymes with bat? And getting them to hear those things, because brains are not wired to read words, which sounds very counterintuitive, but if you think about it, in the history of human beings, words weren't around until late. So brains were developed to hear sounds and to hear words and hear stories, but they weren't wired to read words, to recognize letters. And so it's actually something that you have to teach in, I'm blanking on the word, but there we go. So I think as a parent, making it fun and making it games and just being like learning their letters. But Finley's having a rough time of it now because her sister reads, and she's like, I want to read. Mommy, teach me how to read. I said, oh, you are 4 and you're doing exactly what a 4-year-old should do. I said, you can tell me letters and you're doing this, because that's something we're struggling with in our home of like, she's seeing the sister who's almost 2 years older than her doing these things and wants to do them. So reminding her like, the things you're doing are incredible. They're what a 4-year-old does. Your sister's 6, she's gonna do different things. But if you have any tips on that, I'll take those too. So I think just knowing letters and numbers is a huge jump to the game of like entering kindergarten ready to go. But
How about
making it
social
fun.
skills?
Social skills, yep. Advocating for themselves. because I think one of the biggest issues I see as a kindergarten teacher is kids who are having like friendship issues. And it's not a friendship issue you'd have when you're 16, but it's something like, well, they did this, and it's like, oh, but you could tell them to stop. Oh, okay. And so just helping them figure out what they can solve and what they need help with, because that's probably what we spend most of the year in kindergarten doing. It's like, oh, is that a big problem? Yeah, I'm sure you do it here too. It's like, and you do it at home. You know, like, well, Finley's being mean to me. I'm like, well, it's not mean. So just tell her you don't want her to do that. And so helping them find the words to solve the problems and do that. And, you know, it's a hard line because you want them to come to you when things come up that they need to. And so like helping them understand what is a big problem, what is a little problem, what's a problem you need help with, what's one you could solve on your own. I think, and just learning how to play with each other. But I think all of our kids here are getting the best start at that. Learning how to ask to play with kids. Like if they're feeling like they don't have someone to play with, learning how to ask and do that, but also including others.
Which is huge because it's COVID years, so
Yes.
there may not have been as many play dates or.
Yeah, and I always tell my 6-year-old, I'm like, if you see someone on the playground that looks like they're looking for someone to play with, go invite them to play with you. And just encouraging that, so it's like, it's not always the kid who might not be asked to play, like they're getting asked as well. And so I always tell my own kids after conferences, I never talk about anything academic. I'm always like, oh, they said you were really friendly, and you were really kind, and that's the best thing for me to hear about you. Because I think when we start to focus on academics, especially at younger ages, they already start to think and have the mentality of, I'm behind. I don't know, like that kind of thing, or I'm so-and-so can do this and I can't. And so as a parent, I always focus on the things that they're celebrating and like what it looks like to be a good
Exactly
person.
what Brooks was saying.
Yes, exactly.
What do you want them to pick up on?
Yeah, and I think that's always been important to me because I've seen parents who are even in first grade so focused on like what are they learning, what are they doing. And so I just think for me as a parent, what do I want them to do? I want them to be at school and I want them to be kind. I want them to be listening to people. I want them to be like including others. And so that's what I celebrate with them.
Can I add one thing?
Please do, yeah.
Something that I see a lot is that young people have a really hard time talking to adults. Working with the same sophomore from Wayfair, kind of ordering a Starbucks, where so many kids would just run up and they want their hot chocolate. She is unable to talk to another adult. Unable. She's paralyzed. She's 16 years old. This should be a skill set that she has. She might like it, but she should have it. Learning how to look an adult in the eye. One, you want them to know who's safe and who's not. They need to know how to engage with other people besides yourself and your family. And you want them to be able to live in the world and be a part of it. And so, how do they talk to the teacher and the other teacher and the teacher next door? Or the principal, when the principal comes into the classroom. Some children will walk right up and engage and some will never engage unless they're spoken to. And so, learning how to be comfortable with an adult that's not their parent. Obviously, it's a safe adult, but somebody that they can have a conversation with. And that is a learned skill, and it sometimes means we have to like, the same girl said she was so mad at her dad because he made her order water. She's a sophomore in high school. She had to order her own water at dinner, and she was mad at her dad. Now she has got to learn how to look someone else in the eye and order water. There's no judgment, there's not difficult, these aren't like, you know, feminine products, this is easy. Right? This is easy. This is low hanging fruit. So when your children are little, they might be a little less anxious over some of that. If they can engage with the woman at the Target checkout, that's wonderful. They're learning how to talk to other people, ask other questions, answer questions. It's that natural conversation that COVID 100% shut down.
Yes.
And we should be engaging with the world around us. That's what makes us all better. And so we might have to lead a little bit, and we might have to let them fumble through it a little bit.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think another thing, always be willing to ask the teacher for help. I think I'm a teacher and I still ask my coworkers for help on things because we live in such a society of you should know it all. You're a parent, you should know how to do this. you had a kid. And I'm like, oh, I don't know how to do any of it. And so I think, you know, if you have questions, ask your kid's teacher. Like I taught first grade for 10 years, so I taught probably, oh, I have to do math now, like 200 some kids. So I knew a lot about 6 and 7 year olds and how they learned. And I have one 6-year-old at home. My husband struggles with that because he doesn't have the lens that I have of seeing 100 other 6-year-olds, and some things drive him crazy, and I'm like, it's normal. And so asking your child's teacher, like, do you see this at school? Is there something that, like, this is what I'm struggling with at home. I have that conversation with parents all the time. Like, I can't get them to do this at home. Well, try this. Like, everyone is a resource to you at a school, and use them as that. Like, don't be afraid to ask a question that has to do with home, because they see your child in a setting of 20 other kids. And so they can give you tips or say, you know, I don't notice that at school, but here's what we do at school that might help them at home. And so I think hopefully you don't feel like you're being judged by your child's teacher, because we never feel like we have all the answers. And so, yeah, when I text Christina, does Finley do this at school? Yeah, so I think that's just the biggest thing is I feel like I grew up feeling like you do it yourself. You figure it out. And I think through the last year of crazy things happening in our life and work, I've learned a lot of having my village of people, and that includes teachers, that includes my friends, that includes like taking my 6-year-old to a therapist, like not being afraid to admit when I don't know what's going on or I don't have the answer. And I think as a parent, you're raising however many kids, but your child's teacher has probably worked with hundreds of kids, and so they can help you with that.
Are we overwhelming? Cause I have a kindergartner, like, I hesitate to send her an email because I'm like, oh gosh, they're working hard.
No, don't ever, I know, I had a dad apologize to me the other day. He's like the over communicative dad. And I was like, no, it's good, cause I was that parent. Like I would text her teacher in the fall, be like, McGuire has this after school, and then I'd send a note in her folder. But as a teacher, you have 50,000 things going on. So just like when someone reaches out, it helps you ground yourself and be like, oh yeah, I need to check in on that, because there's a lot of times where just the day-to-day gets a little crazy. And so like if you have a concern, share it with them, and I usually it helps me. I'm like, oh, that's good to know. And I mean, and at the end just be like, thanks for all you do. And I think, you know, and I think personally, I don't mind emails. It's like it keeps you connected, and don't feel like that's our job. You know, it's our job to communicate with you. It's our job to answer questions. It's our job to share information with you. So I get that, because it is overwhelming and there's a lot going on, but at the same time, it's part of the job and what we need to be making sure that parents are comfortable and have information.
Plus, if we're intimidated to talk to the teacher, think of how our children feel. And so we're learning how to have those kind of challenging, intimidating conversations. And as a mother of older kids, this is just the beginning. When they get into the bigger schools with the harder subjects, you are advocating for your child left and right. If your child has any ADHD or any anxiety, you are the advocate for your child, and you have to kind of build muscles around that, and that's hard. It's uncomfortable, but it is like a skill set you kind of gotta learn. And some teachers are more responsive than others. I've even gone to the school and said, which teacher likes kids with ADHD? Put my kid in it. Because some of them don't understand.
Yeah.
And they're annoyed still, which they shouldn't be. That's like a 50-year-old feeling, right? And some of them see the creativity and life that these children bring. And so if I don't advocate a little bit or help her advocate now that she's older, then I'm not teaching her how to say, like, this is my best learning environment. So it is something you gotta have to kind of grow, wings around, but you'll be doing it all the way through. And then slowly you back off and they start doing it, right?
But I think you really do have to teach those everyday skills.
Oh,
I mean, at a really young age, I was having my kids, I would sit next to them and they'd dial the number to get a haircut and ask, and I had friends that were going, why are you well, why not? I mean, and they wanted to do what I was doing. I mean, they weren't 5, but they were 10 or 12, and then my oldest goes to college, and she's the only one who knows how to fry a pound of hamburger. And her 8 girls, like, what are you doing with you know what I mean? And it empowers them, it gives them confidence.
We're talking on the phone, you know how many times
Oh.
I'm like, this is a telephone.
They don't do it anymore.
It actually works, like it talks to another human, they don't have that.
They don't have
not
it.
had to practice that because they text only or Snapchat. And so some of those life skills that suddenly you really wish you'd leaned into a little bit more, you know, you can, and if, when they're young, they might be a little more pliable, you can make it a game a little bit. But if you email the teacher, it actually comes back, that's cool, right? Sending a letter is still kind of fun to get a letter if you can do that in snail mail, so. But yes, it's a learned skill for all of us.
Yeah, and growing up in the Minnesota Lutheran passive aggressive family, I definitely did not have a mom that was like calling teachers and doing anything. So that was definitely a learned skill for me. Is like I have to interact and push sometimes because it does not happen in that era. But yeah,
I have, when my daughter started college, that she had to go into office hours with the professor, and that was so intimidating for her because she was used to being able just to email or just to have to go in to ask questions. It was really, and she texted me, well, I'm off to step out of my comfort zone and go to office hours. And, you know, of course the professor was great, you know, but it's a hard
I do wonder,
skill.
like, I think a lot about, you know, there's a big push for technology in school. You know, there's always technology referendums and whatever, and I'm like, we hardly use it in our classroom because I'm like, they are surrounded by it. And I don't, my own child, like, we have limits on screens at home. They're getting smaller. They used to be non-limits. But I just think, like, when they're at school, they have 20 kids around them, they don't need to be on a screen. And because I do worry about that whole thing of, like, going in to talk to somebody. And, like, I even have that panic of, like, someone's calling. I'm like, why are they calling? Why are they calling? Why are they texting me? And so I just think about that a lot in how that works at school as well. And with my own children of, like, my 6-year-olds are already saying, when do I get a phone? Can I, how about for my 12th birthday? I'm like, no, 1, I'm not setting a date because you will remember. And 2, no, you won't. Like, it's, so I just think that's another piece that will be calling you and
spend a lot of time on.
Yeah, because it's,
In the meantime, I mean, in the middle schools and high schools, everything's online.
yes.
Actually, my daughter was doing math at home today and showing me how the teacher had the camera in the wrong angle, and so he's like teaching this really hard lesson, and it was up his nose. I was like, oh man, you guys are gonna have so many stories. And the irony is, like, they're in school, so I don't know why the classroom lesson was online, but that's where those daily interactions are so important, that they learn how to engage with real humans, because their world is only going to be more technology based, and they will want a phone at some point, and you will wrestle through that, as all of us have, and they will too. So if they don't have a repertoire of skills with humans, they won't need it when they get a cell phone. Like, they won't need it.
Yeah.
And that's the scary part. The way they date now, it's bizarre, but it's what they do. They find people on Snapchat, and that they start dating, that, like, they get to know each other that way, so they never have to have a conversation. And on Snapchat, they never even have to send words. They send, like, picture of the floor, which is amazing. But there's a whole thing for people where kids are all different. But again, social interaction is so important.
Yeah.
Because every other piece of our world, I feel like, is pulling that away from them. Even like AirPods, right? If you put them in, don't talk to me. And even if they're not on, that's kind of like the universal symbol, right? So constantly teaching our kids how to be engaged with people, their skills might stink, they'll get better, but not if they're not doing it.
And one other random readiness that made me think of the screens, writing, like getting them to write their name and just having stamina with fine motor, because a lot of our 2nd and 3rd grade teachers are like, our kids can't write, and they don't have the stamina to write a few sentences, and so just getting them, you know, having them be able to write their name, write a few letters, write some numbers. I mean, my husband's working remotely, and like a year ago he goes, I think I forgot how to write. Because he was like starting to write something, and he's like, I haven't had to write for so long, and I was like, oh, yeah, and so our kids are going through the same thing right now, where these things that were just every day, they haven't done them for kids were kind of back last year, but really a lot of it was on the computer, and so just that stamina, I think, is the biggest thing to work on with them. And even, going into kindergarten, they don't need a lot of it, 5 minutes. It's kind of what, like, can they sit and listen to a story for 5 minutes? Great, and I think all of them here can, because they do. And so, but I think that's the biggest thing. Some of them, yeah.
Depends on the day.
But I think, but even like walking through Target, I feel like I notice a lot more, like, kids are in a cart on a screen, and I'm like, and so the girls, I'm like, no, sorry, you have to learn how to shop at Target with me, because your mom's a teacher, and she's gonna do all these mean things, like not let you bring 7 necklaces to school, and 12 headbands, because it's a distraction. And so, I just think these little things, like, it does make it easier to shop at Target for us if we put our kid on a screen. But it also doesn't allow them to build the stamina of figuring things out, looking around, sustaining attention to something. And so I think all these things that have made parenting easier for us over the 2 years, because parenting has been hard. It is hard, and then the last 2 years has been really hard, have really affected kids in a negative way, of not being able to interact with people, not being able to hold attention to an activity, not having stamina to do things, because they're used to this constant flash of a screen. A show is very engaging because it's quick, instead of like looking at a book where the pictures don't move, or being asked to color something. And so anything you can do to build their stamina of just doing something for 5 to 10 minutes that doesn't involve a screen and involves them producing something, I think is huge. Even if it makes Target harder, it helps in the long run.
Thank you. Very,
Yeah.
thank you
Okay,
very
perfect.
much. Well, yeah.